Ed used to go into a house with Lorraine and myself and other investigators, not to see a ghost, not to have a jump scare, not to be thrilled by a paranormal event. He was thrilled enough growing up in a haunted house from age 5 to age 12 in Bridgeport. He was actually scared out of his wits during those years. And when he was 17 years old and joined the United States Navy in World War II, he said to Lorraine, who we had met when he was 16, he said, when I get out of the Navy, I'm going to see if people have the same kind of haunting phenomena as I did. And when he went into a home, he really felt for these people, and he wanted to help them. The shows you see on television today are actually, in my opinion, disgraceful. Because they're not really helping anybody. All they're doing is getting television ratings. Like, who saw Ghost Adventures last night? Anybody? I'm glad it wasn't too many people. Because on that show, I didn't see the whole thing, but people were emailing me all day, saying that they were, disrespecting Ed and Lorraine in some way or fashion. Kind of like saying they were in over their heads. If anybody's in over their heads in the paranormal realm, it's Zach and his Ghost Adventures that he makes up. I went on one of his Ghost Adventure episodes, and I was very disappointed that I even did it. I took the Annabelle doll out there. As a lot of you know, it's the only time I've ever taken the doll out of state. And when I did that, I thought it'd be okay because they begged me. And I said, okay, I'll go out if you give me a first-class ticket and the doll a first-class ticket to sit next to me in a case. Because I'm not going to put the doll in the luggage and lose it, and first-class accommodations. And they said, okay, we'll do that for you, but we'll be very respectful of the doll. Zach really wants you to come out. Then Zach called me on the phone and wanted me to come out. Oh, we know how important it is to be respectful to that doll and not mess with it. And then he messes with it when I went out there. And not only that, he was very unfriendly. He's not the kind of guy that you're going to warm up to very easily. So when he says anything at all about the Warrens, that upsets me. And apparently Roger Perrin, who was the subject of The Conjuring 1, he and his family. I met Roger on the set of The Conjuring 1 and Andrea. Apparently Roger said something about punching Ed in the face during the investigation and knocking him down. Now, I know Ed Warren. He didn't do that. They didn't do that to Ed because Ed would have just went quite crazy on him. Ed would not back down from a fight like you saw in those promotions. We don't back down from fights. Ed would never back down from a paranormal fight or a physical fight. But Roger Perrin can go, as far as I can tell, he can go pound sand. So I got that out of my chest, off my chest. How many people here tonight saw The Conjuring 1? Good. 2? Conjuring 2. Annabelle 1. Annabelle 2. Annabelle Comes Home. The Nun. Well, I got some good news for you. Conjuring 3 is already in the can. It's already been filmed. And not only that, it's going to be about a Connecticut case. It's going to be about the Devil in Connecticut case in Brookfield, Connecticut. Which from here, about not even an hour. Brookfield, Connecticut, the Devil Made Me Do It case in 1980. Arnie Johnson, who had the demonic entity enter him momentarily and stab a kennel owner named Bono to death. That's going to be the subject of The Conjuring 3. And they're already in the process of doing The Nun 2. But let me just say this, ladies and gentlemen. The only time we were ever consulted on a movie was The Conjuring 1, The Conjuring 2, and The Conjuring 3. We were never consulted on Annabelle or Creation or Annabelle Comes Home or The Nun. They just did them. They just made it up. So when people ask how accurate were those movies, I'll give you the true answer to the best of my knowledge. Lorraine and I consulted on The Conjuring 1. It's about, remember, Hollywood always does dramatic license, always. If you saw a documentary on Abe Lincoln, it wouldn't be 100% true. They always surmise things, make up things for continuity, for thrill factor, especially in a horror movie. 65 to 85% true in The Conjuring 1. Conjuring 2, about 50% true. Conjuring 3, I haven't seen it yet, but if they do it the way they've been doing things with consultations of the family and us, it might be around 60-70% true. But The Nun was totally made up. The only true factors in Annabelle, the only true factors in Annabelle were the name of the movie, Annabelle, and that it was a doll. Everything else was fake or made up. Annabelle Creation, same thing. But Annabelle Comes Home is a little bit better. There's 0% in 1, 0% in 2, but Annabelle Creation was about 20% accurate, because it's true that Ed and Lorraine went to this family's house, these two nurses, spoke to her, interviewed them, took the Annabelle doll from the home, drove it home, had problems on the way home, and then Ed placed it in his occult museum. That is all true. So the very beginning of the movie is spot on. But after that, where it attacked Judy here, that's not true. Judy was so afraid of that doll and so afraid of the museum anyway, she would never go into the museum ever. When's the last time you went into the museum, honey? Judy, when's the last time you went to the museum? Like never? Like once? Make-A-Wish Foundation, we had a little girl who wanted to see the museum. She just walked into the door and said hello and walked out. That's how much my wife likes the paranormal. She's deathly afraid because of the stories that Ed used to tell her when she was a child. So, and The Nun, again, the only true thing about The Nun was the Maurice, the part about Maurice the farmer. That's a real case, and you're going to see it on video tonight. So that, in a nutshell, is what it's all about. How many people tonight, though, believe that there are such a thing as ghosts? Wow, that's good. How many people here have ever had a problem with a ghost, seen a ghost, lived with a haunted house? Yeah? Okay. I don't have to prove anything to you guys, do I? You know, spirits are real. Ghosts are real. The devil is a real entity. Now, if you believe in God, I hope you all do. Of course, I can't make you. You have to either believe or you don't believe. But if you believe in God, then you believe in the opposite. Everything has a negative to it. There's a plus and a minus to everything in life. It's a balance. You know, so there is a God. We know this from our evidence too, not just our religion and our faith. And we know that there's a demonic entity out there wanting to cause harm to any human being. Are you going to be haunted or attacked by a demonic entity in your lifetime? The odds are probably better for you to get struck by lightning 3 times in 3 days. You're probably never going to be the subject of an attack from a demonic entity. But you could. And how could you? Why would you? Well, if you dabble in occult practices, if you always want to communicate with spirits, if you go and use a Ouija board on a regular basis, if you go to a psychic reader who's not knowledgeable on how to protect themselves, they can draw in anything, unbeknownst to you. Now remember, a demonic entity can come as your grandmother. It can fool you into thinking it's your mother or your father in a communication. And that's what happens in a lot of Ouija board cases. But if you have strong faith in the Lord, your Creator, and do good things, you're never going to have to worry about a demonic entity coming after you. You really won't. You know, it's very rare to be possessed by a demonic entity. In fact, Ed Warren and Lorraine have been involved in perhaps 8,000 to 10,000 haunting investigations of various kinds. And out of those 10,000, Ed was involved in about 70 exorcisms, 70 cases of demonic possession out of 10,000. So it's not as popular, or as, I shouldn't say popular, as common as people think. It's very uncommon. So what I want to do though tonight is I'm going to show you some old style slides. And why I want to do that is because Ed always used to show slides, and it's kind of a tribute to Ed and Lorraine. But not only that, when you convert a slide that are these old slides to a video, the resolution somehow degrades. I've tried it, I can't get it to be perfect. So on these particular slides that I'm going to show you, it's going to be slides and not video. But afterwards, I do have some pretty good video for you to watch. But I want to start out with the Amityville, Long Island case. I'll bet you every single person in this room knows Amityville, right? But I want to tell you, when it started, Ed got a phone call in 1976, March of 76. And it was a call from Marvin Scott from Channel 5 News in New York. When he hung up the phone after speaking to Marvin Scott, he hung it up and he looks at Lorraine and he says, "We have to go to Amityville tomorrow." And Lorraine looked at Ed and she said, "Amityville, is that New Jersey, Ed?" He had no clue. Remember, it was just another haunted case until they got there. And then all hell broke loose. So, of course, that's Ed and Lorraine's photo. Can we drop the lights on me? Just darken everything up. That's Ed and Lorraine. It's an old photo of them. They were #1 on the college lecture circuit for many, many years. And one year they came in #2. And I said, "Lorraine, who came in #1? She goes, "Well, we weren't too worried about it. We weren't, too unhappy about it." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, #1 was Vincent Price."
Oh.
So that was pretty cool that they were #2. Dan, can you get the next slide for me? This is the Amityville house as it stood back in November of 1974 when Ronald DeFeo actually murdered every member of his family. Ronald DeFeo Jr., practiced Satanism, and he was a little mentally imbalanced, to say the least. He went from room to room at 3:15 approximately, November 13th, 1974, and he walked through that house, and he murdered with a high-powered rifle every member of his family. He shot his 2 sisters in the back of the head as they slept on their stomach. His 2 brothers in the back of the head, 1 shot each, and his mother 1 shot, and his father 2 shots to the back of the head. That was 7 rounds from a high-powered gun that would reverberate. If I shot that rifle off in this room, you would have ringing in your ears for several days. That's how loud it is. You wouldn't be able to hear anything. Yet, no one called the police. No one said they even heard a shot. And what did Ronald DeFeo do that morning after he killed everybody? He went to work as if nothing ever happened. Next. It's another shot of the house. There's that sign you see in the front with no sign hanging from it. Used to have a sign hanging from it that said, "High Hopes." Next. That's just another shot of this large house in Amityville on a nice property with a lake behind it and a boathouse. Next. Actually, there's a pool and the boathouse behind it. Next. That's Ronald DeFeo. I'm sorry, that's George Lutz, not Ronald. It's George Lutz walking after he purchased the property. Now, George, a lot of people would ask me and ask Ed, well, what kind of guy would just leave his house and never come back? He must have been kind of a nerd, kind of a wimpy guy. And Ed would always laugh. He said, a wimpy guy? George Lutz was a former Marine. He spent 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, and he's very proud of it. He was a black belt in karate. He was a motorcycle guy, had 2 custom Harley-Davidson motorcycles. He was nowhere near a nerdy guy or a wimpy guy. But 28 days after he purchased the home in Amityville, he fled with his family and never came back. Next. These are some of the statues that were erected when George first bought the house from Ronald DeFeo Ronald DeFeo Sr.'s family. And we found out that these statues were put up by Ronald DeFeo Sr. before the murders, of course. And the neighbor walked over to Mr. DeFeo's house one day and was talking to him. And he said, "Mr. DeFeo, Ron, why do you have all these religious artifacts in front of your house? And I also noticed, Ron, that you have a priest living with you," which he did. Ronald DeFeo Sr. had a priest living with him for about 6 months. He goes, "How come?" And here's what Ronald DeFeo said to the neighbor. He said, "Why? Why do I have that?" He goes, "I have a devil on my back, that's why." That was his answer to the neighbor. Because Ronald DeFeo Jr. was acting quite strange and practicing satanic rituals in that house. Next. That's the the lake behind, and there's a boathouse. Beautiful, beautiful property purchased back then for $50,000. Next. That's Ed Warren on the right, and an investigator from Duke University on the left. And the total amount of people in that house numbered about 11 or 12 people. There was a few people from Duke, Ed, Lorraine, Paul Bartz was Ed's assistant, and the camera people, and Marvin Scott from Channel 5, and Mary Pascarella, who was actually a very, very good psychic who lived in Hamden, and she has since passed away. You'll see a picture of her. Next. That's Lorraine in front there on the left, going up the stairs with the two investigators. The guy all the way to the right is Paul Bartz, their assistant. Next. Okay, that's one of the babies, the child's room. Now, I want you to see the bedding that's here. You'll see a few more photos of the bedding. The bedding is the same bedding, believe it or not, that the DeFeos owned. When that DeFeo house was purchased, the beds were still in the house. And George Lutz kept the bedding. He kept it with gunshots in them. Next. That's the room where the flies would, hundreds of flies would, a sewing room where hundreds of flies would attract on the glass. Next. Here's the bedding of another of the young girls that lived in the house. Next. That's Missy's room. That's where the little pig-like eyes would appear outside that window. And the rocking chair would move back and forth. And she'd call this invisible entity Jody. Next. That's George's little den that he had. He would, retire to that room once in a while to watch that really out-of-date television. Most of you people here never saw those, but I grew up with those. I grew up with a little 7-inch TV that the console was about, 4 feet high, and it was a 7-inch TV screen. It was pretty funny because we used to sit and look at the test pattern. Now, a lot of you people don't even know what the test pattern is, but there was a little test pattern at the end of the night that would go on. We were fascinated by the test pattern. Next. That's George and Kathy's bed. You can see to the left there, you can see Lorraine standing there. But that's the same bed, of course, that George Lutz used. That the DeFeos once owned. Next. Just as you left your apartment, your dorm, your house tonight, they left all their belongings. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, you walking away from your home tonight. You have a nice car in the driveway. You have a couple of motorcycles in the garage. You have a boat, antique furniture. Walking away from that tonight and never going back because you were scared to go back in the house. That's what happened to George and Kathy. Next. That's just another view of the kitchen area inside. These are very, very rare photographs that you're not going to see everywhere, that's for sure. Next. This is the basement area where Ed had walked down. He broke away from the group of people. He said, I'm going to go down and check out the basement. I'll be back. So he walked down there. Now, Ed was like George. Ed was a rough, tough guy. Ed grew up in the east side of Bridgeport, and during the really bad years, like the Depression era, and he used to call it the bloody bucket. So Ed he didn't know how to fight. His father was a prize fighter. Ed didn't know how to fight. He taught him how to box. And Ed would never back down from anybody or anything, but when he was down here in the basement, he came under what we call diabolical attack by a demonic entity. And what Ed described was that it felt as if someone had taken a wet, warm, woolen blanket and threw it over his head and pushed him to the floor. And he couldn't see, he couldn't move. He was paralyzed. He couldn't even yell out, he said. He said, the only thing I could do, Tom, the only thing I could do was think to myself. I couldn't yell out. I could think to myself, though. And I said over and over, I used what's known as religious resistance. I yelled over and over, in the name of Jesus Christ and the blood of Christ, I command you to go back to where you came from. And he kept saying it over and over in his mind. He said it took about 2.5, 3 minutes. Felt like hours. Then the figure, whatever it was, lifted off of him, and it was enough for him to get up and go upstairs, shaken. Next. That said, looking at the freezer that still had all the food still left in it from George and Kathy. Next. That's the actually third floor looking down over the railings to the second floor and down to the foyer in the middle. And that's the foyer areas where the German marching band music would issue from. It would wake up George. He would wake up at about 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd hear this stomping sounds of a marching band and the music of a German marching sound. And he'd look down over the railing, wouldn't see anything. He'd yell down them for to be quiet and run down there to see what's down there. And of course, when he got there, nothing was there. Next. That's Lorraine in her discernment phase. Lorraine was a light trance medium, which means she could actually discern what might in fact be infesting that home. And she said it was a dark entity, inhuman in nature. In fact, she said to Marvin Scott, as Marvin Scott was shadowing her through the house with the camera crew, at one point Marvin Scott said, "What do you feel now, Lorraine? What do you feel now?" And she turned around and looked at him and said, "This is the closest to hell that I ever want to get." And you could even hear that comment in Conjuring 2. That's a true statement. Next. Lorraine walking up the stairs again. Her whole time she's walking through, she's in a semi-trance state.